Welcome to the Imperial Truth. I'm your host, Eric, and I suck at Horus Heresy. So, we are going to talk about reactions today, kind of making our way through the Horus Heresy rulebook and all of the core rules. And we are finally to almost the end. I think we have reactions, we have movement, we need to do a few videos on vehicles, and then we're mostly done. I think we are done. Oh, and then the end phase, which will be a very easy video. So we're getting there in our videos. This reaction video is a little bit late in the overall system. I like reactions. They break up the turn. They are not quite you go, I go, but they have more of a you go, I go feel to them, where you're just not sitting there watching your opponent play the whole turn, which is good because I think that there needs to be that engagement back and forth between players, especially whenever we're reduced to sort of a 4-turn game where we might have been in a 5 or 6-turn game in second edition. They increase engagement. I don't like that some of the reactions actually lower engagement, and that's the editorial side of things that I have debated about bringing to this video. But I am going to bring it to this video because I think that that's part of what I should be doing in these videos is sharing some of my insights as to, from the game design perspective, what I think should be happening. So with our reactions, we have core reactions in the core book. We have advanced reactions, some of which are in the core book, but others might be there because you're Legionis Astartes and you get a special advanced reaction for each of your different legions. There are also psychic reactions, and all of those count as reactions for the rules perspective. They all kind of fall under the same category in the same way that the rules work. In order to use a reaction, you have to spend reaction points. Generally, most of our reactions are going to cost 1 reaction point, but it is possible for a reaction to cost more than 1 point. And you cannot react if you are locked in combat, if your unit is stunned, if they are routed, or if they've already made a reaction for the turn. And in the rules, there is another line where it says that you can't make a reaction if your reaction points have been reduced to 0. But what we're going to do is we're going to see that that's been FAQ'd and changed just a little bit. So in your turn, you get a number of reaction points equal to this chart here. You get 1 up to 1,500 points. You get 2 if you're playing up to 3,500 points. So most games, you're going to be starting with 2 reaction points. And then you get 3 if you are up to 5,000 points. So if you're playing a really large game. You also have access to high command options, unless you're playing Mechanicum, where you might get an additional reaction point for that a model. So like the Legion Praetor is a good example of a model that when you include it in your army, you get an additional reaction point, which must be nice. And there has been an FAQ that says that if your reaction points are 0, you still can use a reaction that reduces the reaction cost to 0. So there are certain, like for example, the Ultramarines, their special rite of war is that once per turn, they get to reduce the cost of 1 reaction to 0. So technically, they could do that if they still had 0 points. Which you weren't previously allowed to do in the initial way that the rule was worded. You cannot use reactions. We talked about this, but there is a section that calls out specifically which units cannot. If you're stunned or routed, if you're locked in combat, if you already reacted, if you have no reaction points remaining and no way to reduce the cost of a reaction to 0, or if a rule says that you otherwise cannot react. So for example, automata, they can't react ever unless you have a Cortex controller in the unit. But generally speaking, they are not allowed to react. Another example is that the reposition reaction requires you to move according to your initiative. So a vehicle that doesn't have an initiative characteristic could not ever do the reposition reaction. In order to do reactions, there are a few caveats called out on page 205 about using them. And these are pretty straightforward, but it is kind of important for us to understand them. For shooting reactions, you need to have line of sight. You can't use your barrage weapon or any other rule to shoot at something that's not within line of sight. Vehicles are only allowed to use their defensive weapons in reactions. We'll define what a vehicle defensive weapon is in a minute. They reactions cannot force your opponent to take leadership tests. At least shooting ones can't. We're going to talk about sort of an exception that might, a little loophole in the rules that might exist in a second. So you can't force leadership tests by doing so many casualties to someone, or using a flame weapon to make somebody take a panic check. They also can't give status checks or tactical statuses. So you can't use a shock weapon as a reaction to put the shock X ability on a unit. That doesn't work. If you hit a unit with a pinning 2 weapon, they don't have to make a pinning test. None of those things apply. That does make shock weapons a bit less powerful, which is kind of unfortunate. I feel like they maybe should, but I understand why they're not doing that. That's it would gum the game down just a little bit. When you make your shooting reaction, you are considered to be stationary. So keep that in mind as we move forward. And then the limited X rule still applies. So I'm thinking about if you have a Phosphex weapon, the Leviathan Dreadnought has a Phosphex launcher. That's limited 3. You could technically return fire with that, and it would still count as it would still count as having been used up. For our movement reaction rules, you move your initiative characteristic when you react. If you don't have a movement characteristic, you can't move. You can't take advantage of that. You don't suffer difficult terrain from your movement reaction. However, you do suffer dangerous terrain tests if you move through dangerous terrain. We've talked about previously about sort of how crazy dangerous terrain could be if you put a unit in there and force your opponent to do things like react and stuff in there. You can end up making a lot of dangerous terrain tests in a single turn, which I think is kind of dynamic. It definitely makes that a slightly more useful type of terrain to put on the table. The reposition reaction, so we'll go through the reactions that are in the main book. The reposition reaction triggers when your opponent ends their movement within 12 inches and line of sight. So you have to meet those 2 characteristics. This allows for a movement up to your initiative characteristic. And you can, according to page 232, react back into a transport. So you have to kind of keep track of your inches. This is where I'm going to editorialize just a little bit. I don't like this reaction. I think it should be less than 12 inches, or you shouldn't be able to react back into vehicles, and you shouldn't be able to react off of objectives, or there should be some penalty for reacting off of objectives. And the reason for this is twofold. Number one, it is entirely possible for a Vanguard unit, and there are a lot of melee-centric Vanguard units, to move up within charge distance of an enemy unit that is on an objective. And then you, as the reactive player, can reactive move your unit off of that objective so that no longer are you within range of that objective. And now your opponent won't get their Vanguard points. And that, to me, is promoting unengaging gameplay. I'm fine reacting away from people so they don't charge you. That's totally okay. That's the way the rule should work. But the fact that you can then deny your opponent points by doing this, it's unengaging, right? What's going to happen is your opponent's not going to move up, because if they move within 12 inches, you're going to react off of the objective, right? Or they're going to move up and you're going to react off the objectives, and then there's not going to be a charge. There's not going to be Vanguard points, right? Like, we don't want rules in the game that encourage players to not play the game. I hope that makes sense. The same thing happens with moving back into a transport, especially if we have a transport like a Land Raider, which has the assault ability, which means you can charge out of it, and also is pretty durable, right? If you have a unit and every time your opponent gets within range to shoot them or hurt them or do anything to them, you react back into your Land Raider to deny your opponent the ability to shoot or charge that unit, and then you get out on your turn and shoot them, and then when they move up again, you get back into your tank. That is very unengaging gameplay. And from my perspective, and I understand that this is not everybody's perspective, but this is my perspective, I come to the table to play the game and roll dice and charge things and do things with my units. And in and outing on a transport is counterintuitive to the type of game that I personally want to play. So I will say this on the transport thing: keep track of your opponent and how far out of the transport they've moved. The entire unit has to move back within 2 inches of the transport, which is a big bubble, admittedly. However, they only have 4 inches to do it, and they can't move a model and then pick it up and take it off the table. The whole unit moves, and then if the whole unit is within 2 inches of the vehicle, they can put the unit back into the transport. And so they don't quite get to just, I would be, if your opponent is going to do this, I would make sure that they follow the rules with it. For example, a Space Marine that disembarks 7 inches from a transport. So you measure from the transport, and then they moved 7 inches away from that. That model might not be in range anymore with a 4 inch move back to get back within the transport, depending on where they're positioned and sort of where the access points are and stuff. So, I would make sure that they're following those rules. It is also worth noting, and this is something I noticed in preparing for this video, is that disembarkation is not moving. So the reactive move for reposition happens when your unit ends its move. And because disembarking is tied to the transport, basically during the move subphase, when a player selects a model with a transport subtype they control, they may choose to embark the unit, disembark the unit that's within it. That's not selecting a unit and moving them in the movement phase, which is what triggers reposition. So you could reposition away from a transport moving up to you, but once the guys get out, you can't reposition from that anymore, which is good to know, because it does make the reposition reaction a little bit less powerful, which I think is good. It is a very powerful reaction. The return fire reaction occurs when your weapons are declared during the shooting phase. So the shooting phase, you select a unit that you're going to shoot with, you select your target, then you declare your weapons that you're going to shoot at that target with, and then you measure your range. So when you say, I'm going to shoot this unit, and then you say, I'm going to shoot the unit with my las cannons, as opposed to maybe bolt pistols or something like that. You, at that point, your opponent can declare their return fire. And before casualties are removed, so it's before step, I think, 11 in the shooting phase. So before any casualties are removed or tactical statuses get applied, they get to return fire. So you say, I'm going to shoot that unit, I'm going to use my las cannons, and they're like, okay, I'm going to return fire against you. And then after you're done sort of doing all your rolling and resolving all your fire groups, then they can make their shots. The weapons will count as stationary, but you can't have any tactical statuses or cool checks from this that get applied. Again, timeout for my second to last, I think, editorialization of this. I, again, think that this is too powerful. I think that it should either be snap fire shots or not count as stationary or something. And the reason why this is kind of silly is that I don't understand why let's say, a Lehman Russ with double las cannons in the turret and a las cannon in the hull, a tank can't return fire against a unit that shoots the tank, but a unit of infantry that ran the last turn, that are all carrying las cannons, can suddenly turn 180 degrees around and take shots with their las cannons at full ballistic skill, mind you, and also count as stationary. Like, it just, from a immersion perspective, it doesn't make sense. From a gameplay perspective, it doesn't make sense. From a game mechanics perspective, it doesn't make sense, because you end up with these situations where somebody will say, well, I'm not going to shoot at your Deredeo Dreadnought because I know that you'll just kill me in return. And again, we're encouraging unengaging gameplay. I don't mind it happening before the casualties are removed, but I think that there should be some penalty for shooting return fire, either snap fires or not stationary, or happens after casualties or something. Not all of them, but just one of them, to sort of tone it down just a little bit. Um, there is this little caveat on page 205 that we talked about, that only defensive weapons on a vehicle can be fired during reactive fire. And yeah, so a defensive weapon is anything with the strength 6 or less. Anything with the strength 7 or more is considered a tactical weapon. And pintle mounted weapons and sponson mounted weapons are always defensive. So, for example, in Mechanicum, we have the Karaknos, which has these two big lightning cannon type. I don't think they're called lightning cannons. They're lightning guns or something. But anyway, they are strength 7. They have 3-inch AoEs, and I can return fire with those because they are sponsons. And so sponsons are always defensive weapons. Or if you've got a Land Raider, and that Land Raider, or in the Spartan in the image, where you've got that like quad las gun thing going, or las cannon thing going on, that is a defensive weapon because it is on the sponson. Similarly, if you had a melta gun or multi-melta as a pintle mounted weapon, you could react with that as well. Overwatch occurs in step 4 of the charge process. This is when volley fire is occurring. And when you Overwatch, the active player makes their volley attacks or doesn't. They don't have to. It's not part of the rule, but basically they do their thing if they're going to make them. And volley fire is resolved completely beforehand, so you would remove any casualties that you suffer, and then you resolve your shooting attacks. And this one is where it gets kind of crazy, actually, because this is reactive shooting, right? And according to page 205, when I do reactive shooting, I'm stationary all the time. So I'm stationary for Overwatch. And in addition, when I take my Overwatch shots, according to the Overwatch rule, which I'm pulling up right now, I can make those attacks at full ballistic skill, and they're not snapshots. And I can use any ranged weapon to do that. So Overwatch with something like multi-meltas are now at strength 9 because they're heavy strength, right? Overwatch with las cannons are damage 2 because they're heavy damage. And in addition, I'm not snap firing. That's pretty crazy, but it gets even crazier. You can't take damage mitigation saves against Overwatch. I mean, the cover kind of makes sense, but no damage mitigation at all. So if you have Feel No Pain 5 up, you just never get it against Overwatch. That is also part of it. Well, sorry, it's shrouded damage mitigation. Let me rescind that. You can take Feel No Pains, but you can't take any shrouded damage mitigation. So again, like if you have built-in shrouded mechanics, I'm thinking about like the assassins, the Kulexis assassin has a shrouded damage mitigation save. They just never get that if you Overwatch against them. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool, and definitely something that I've not done. It hasn't come up a lot, but yeah. Sorry about the Feel No Pain thing. Shrouded damage mitigation saves. Making sure I'm being specific. But yeah, this seems really good. I definitely need to utilize this one a bit more in my games. Death or Glory is one of those that I wish would come up. So this is an advanced reaction. It's the first of our advanced reactions. Death or Glory occurs when a vehicle drives over an enemy unit. So if you don't know this, in Horus Heresy, you can drive your vehicles over top of enemy units. It's not very good, but you can do it. I really want to do it because the Triaros and I think the Karachnos get bonuses for doing it. The problem is that you have to clear the unit, right? You have to like move over them, and the Mechanicum tanks are so long that it's kind of hard to make that happen. But one day I'm going to. And when I do, I hope that my opponent deaths or glories. So to death or glory, you get to make one melee or ranged set of attacks. So if you have a multi-melta, you get to shoot with your multi-melta. If you have a power fist, you get to swing with all of your attacks from your power fist. Here's where it gets a little weird, and the rules kind of seem odd. So if the vehicle is removed as a casualty, the reacting model survives. Pretty straightforward. So if you kill the tank or whatever is running over you, you get to live. If you fail to kill them or stop them from moving over you, then you're removed from as a casualty. And I don't think the unit suffers. Yes, the unit doesn't suffer the damage that they normally would from being run over. It does say if the vehicle is pinned, though, too. And I was thinking about this a lot because you can't put a status on something with shooting during a reaction. So, like if you have a shock pinning weapon, it doesn't work. However, then I forgot that you can still have shock pinning melee weapons. So, like if you had a did graviton hammers shock pin? They might shock pin. But I'm thinking like corpuscent stave. So if you get a corpuscent stave and you rolled a 5 or a 6 on the attack roll, bam, you're done. The vehicle gets locked in place and you heroically stop it from moving. That's kind of a pretty niche use of that weapon, but it is still there. I'm You can correct me if I'm wrong, but the shooting, the no statuses thing only applies, I think, to shooting in here. And so it's a little niche. I don't know that anybody has ever in the history of third edition Horus Heresy used the Death or Glory reaction, but it's now if it ever comes up. We also have the intercept reaction. So the intercept reaction is when the active player brings on a unit from reserves or aerial reserves. And we'll talk about these individually in a second. So you bring on your unit, and then I get to take shots at you. It has to be snapshots when we do this. So they're already lower power. And see, this is where I think we're really missing it with the return fire reaction, because snapshots just feels right. You're taking shots at something reactively. They shouldn't be full ballistic skill. It does specifically call out here that vehicles can only attack with defensive weapons. And I'm not sure why, because we already know that vehicles can only attack with defensive weapons. That's in the regular rules for reactions. So if you know why this exists, let me know, because it doesn't apply to like Skyfire weapons. I think Skyfire. It might be the other one, rapid tracking. One of those two allows you to shoot weapons that are bigger than normal, so you can like shoot with your missiles back at planes and stuff. But yeah, it's interesting. Also note that disembarking units cannot be targeted by this reaction. So this reaction targets the aerial reserves that are coming on. So you would be shooting the Arvis lighter that comes on, not the unit that gets out of the Arvis lighter, because again, they're disembarking. And then for something like a drop pod, the models in the drop pod don't actually get out till the movement phase. So this reaction occurs during that first the reserves portion of the movement phase, and then the unit doesn't disembark until the move part of the movement, the move substep of the movement phase. And so the models that you would want to shoot out of a dreadnought aren't even on the board yet. So yeah, it's kind of weird timing, but you're reacting against the drop pod or the Arvis lighter. You're not reacting against the unit that's popping out of those units. The evade reaction is kind of interesting. I play Mechanicum. I don't have any cavalry, but this one seems pretty cool. So this is light or cavalry units only, and it's at the end of step 4 in the charge subphase. This is before you roll your charge distance, but after you've made your sit up move and volley fire. You can use his reaction to initiative move away in any direction. I guess you could move towards if you wanted to make it an easier thing. And then it can cause the unit to fail a charge. That's kind of why it's cute, because if you moved far enough away and then they automatically fail their charge, then they could potentially be stunned, I think, because they have to make a check if you fail a charge. So that's kind of cool. I don't see this one a lot because I don't see a lot of cavalry. Unfortunately, the jet bikes, they're just not very good in this edition. I think they have 1 wound and they're still only toughness 4. They should have something that makes them more durable and sort of stick around better. But yeah, it's there if you want to do it. Then we have Nullify, and I'm definitely going to get this one wrong on some way because I don't have any psychers in any of my forces. And so I'm not really familiar with how psychic powers work. So you have to have the psyker trait to do a Nullify, or the Colexus Assassin can do it. They have a special rule, I think, that says that they can nullify. And you have to do it when you fail a resistance check to negate a psychic curse. So looking through the rules a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, your opponent says, I'm going to use a psychic power. And then you, as part of that psychic power, you get to roll your, I guess, a will save as a resistance check to try to negate it. If you fail, then a psyker that is the target of this or is visible, can see the unit that's the target of this, or can see the unit that's casting this psychic power, that's doing the psychic power, they can make a willpower check to negate the psychic power. So it's a little bit of it's a little bit of a safety net there to potentially stop psychic powers. Yeah, I don't know. Do you use this? We have 1,000 Suns player locally who plays with psychers, and otherwise I've never seen anybody bring a psycher to a game. So maybe this is something that happens a lot elsewhere, but it tends not to happen in games around where I'm at. And lastly, for our reactions, we have Heroic Intervention. Heroic Intervention happens in step 1 of the challenge subphase. If your opponent chooses not to initiate a challenge, you, as the reactive player, can then issue a challenge. And because you are the challenger at this point, then you have challenge advantage in that first face-off step. So you get to choose your gambit first in that step. It's just an ability that lets you do challenges to people. It is fun to do. I don't know. It's cool. It's nice that it's there and you have that option. So conclusions. I like reactions. I think that they're a bit hit or miss. So return fire is so powerful that it's going to happen every game and probably multiple times a game. I was going to say that it happens every turn, but it probably doesn't happen every turn. But I would say that out of a 4-turn game, you're probably return fire is coming up at least once a turn. Death or glory has never happened in the history of 3rd edition. Maybe somebody has done it. And if you have, let me know in the comments and I will congratulate you on being an absolute boss. However, I don't see it happening. And it's weird that those two things are considered to be the same sort of a cost. So death or glory costs 1 point and return fire costs 1 point. Now, could death or glory cost 0 points and it wouldn't make a difference? It probably wouldn't make a difference. It's just kind of weird that that's the way it is. So that's one thing. Reposition and return fire, I think, they're just too powerful. They encourage non-engaging play. I generally will try not to reactive move away from people who are trying to charge me, unless it's my friend who plays World Eaters, and then I always try to do it because I don't want those guys in melee with me. So that's that. It's just weird. Return fire is kind of dumb mechanically. There should be some penalty for it. There should be some limitation to it. The fact that I'm literally better at shooting my las cannons in return fire than I would be if I moved and shot my las cannons on my turn. That's kind of silly. And the reposition reaction at least can be fixed if we change the scenario. So the reposition reaction changes a lot if we play Blood for Blood as the primary, which is the one for Zone Mortalis, because suddenly there is no reacting away from an objective. You can react away to try and keep somebody from charging you. That's totally fine. But you're not gonna. There's no running away from an objective, and so it's at least fine in that context. But what do you think? What do you think about the reactions? Did I miss anything? Do you think I got anything wrong? Do you think I'm wrong about the disembarkation thing? Read the rule before you come at me in the comments, because it is an important thing to understand. But yeah, that's it. And thanks for watching, and I see you in our next video.